Right on. Here we go. Winding it up again. Oh, right on. I hear you, Southern. Wind it up. Well, heck, there's 6 people in here watching now. I can get this thing on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, you know what it is.
Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Noory. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. Up next, we talk about vampires. That's right. Varla Ventura joins us on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. Varla Ventura was introduced to the very strange and unusual at a young age. Her first game, of course, was the Ouija board and family picnics in cemeteries, very common outings for her. She spent most of her years exploring graveyards, underground tunnels. She's the author of a number of works, including The Vampire, The Malevolent Banshee, and The Natural Causes of Lycanthropy. And here's Varla back on Coast to Coast. Varla, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me back, George.
Some will ask if you're related to Jesse Ventura.
I will say I wish. I'm a big fan. I grew up with WWF, so.
Well, good for you. So no relation there.
No relation.
Did you check? Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, if he's listening and he'd like to talk personally, I'd be happy to talk with him about it.
You never know. He's touring somewhere around this country, no doubt.
Yeah.
But anyways, what have you been up to lately?
Well, I've been working very hard on a collection of books that we're going to talk a little bit about some of the subjects tonight. Been doing a magical creatures series. It's an ebook series. You can go out and get it right now on Amazon. You just put in Varla Ventura plus magical creatures, and you'll find there's an extensive collection of fairies, changelings, vampires, werewolves, banshees. And it's been very time-consuming. I've been looking through a lot of volumes and volumes of what I call forgotten lore, and a lot of these are sort of really old books that were popular in their day, but their day, was in the 1800s. So I've been having a lot of fun doing that and, of course, getting ready for Halloween season.
That's the time. But those old books are classics, though, aren't they?
Yeah, really. Yeah, absolutely. And I have enjoyed it tremendously. I've got friends that are on the hunt for an old book, and I'm kind of in awe. When I started this project, I had no idea about the secret lives of some of these authors, what they were doing. They were architects and they were writing Christian hymnals, and meanwhile they were researching werewolves and they were writing about vampires and horror stories and occult powers. So it's kind of it's been really fun to find these kind of old stories that you can imagine people with their high collars and their, low boots and, just very proper, but they've got these secret lives, and I really love that.
Well, let's get into vampires first, then we'll talk about werewolves and banshees and all these other creatures that are out there.
Great.
Tell me a little bit about your research into vampires.
Well, I've done some research into some of the early vampire novels, and one of the first vampire novels that I came upon was one called The Vampire, and it has a really amazing connection to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, it turns out that this story called The Vampire was by John William Polidori. was actually conceived the same night that Frankenstein was conceived. And if you're a fan of Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, you might know the story of Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, and Lord Byron were all hanging out at this lake house in Lake Geneva, and one dark and stormy night, and they were kind of scaring each other. They were reading ghost stories aloud, and I believe it was Lord Byron challenged the group and said, all right, everybody write a ghost story tonight, and we will see whose story is the scariest. And Mary Shelley wrote The Bones of Frankenstein. I don't remember what Lord Byron wrote. Or actually, I do remember what Lord Byron wrote became kind of a sketch for this book, The Vampire, which was not written by Lord Byron. It was written by his personal physician, who I just kind of imagine as like this man who traveled around with him with a case full of medicine and little bottles, and just sort of like followed behind and wrote down everything that he said and paid attention like he was a sort of a stargazer.
And in case he got sick, he was right there for
And he was right there, and I'm sure Lord Byron had plenty of ailments, and he had plenty of money to pay for those ailments. So, in any case, so this story actually was conceived on that night, and I guess Lord Byron wrote this sort of a chapter that he threw out, and Polidori had been there, and he said, hey, you came up with that idea. Would you mind if I took that? Because it got me thinking, and I had this idea about this other story. And so Polidori went on to write this novel, The Vampire, and it was actually the first, it was published, I think it was 70 years before Dracula. So it was a really early vampire.
Okay. That was a big difference.
It was actually very cutting edge. And there's a whole fun story behind, there was all this fake publicity. People said it was Lord Byron, and Lord Byron denied it and was kind of embarrassed by it. And a few publishers, they just put Lord Byron's name on it. It didn't bother to actually check if it was him, probably didn't care.
They didn't care.
To sell the book.
Not in those days.
And if I were Lord Byron, I think I would understand. He was quite a great writer, and I have to be honest, this doesn't read. It's no Bram Stoker novel. It doesn't. It's a page turner, but it doesn't quite have that lyrical poetry that you would expect from Lord Byron. So I think maybe that's why he was kind of like, no, that wasn't me. That was Polidori.
Well, let's get into the vampires, and in terms of this book, The Vampire. Basically, what did it say?
Well, it was a story of a man who kind of, in some ways it sort of laid the groundwork for something like Bram Stoker's Dracula. There was a character a misanthropic character who didn't really fit into society, and he was suspected to be a vampire, but a lot of people didn't really think he was, and he would do little things when he was in the company of others that would start making them suspect. There was a dead mouse that he kind of like reached over and grabbed and ate. And so I don't want to give the ending away, but it sort of develops. It's almost like a clinical study of a vampiric personality, but it's a novel.
Well, did it do many of the things that we think vampires do or might be afraid of? I mean, like garlic, a stake in the heart, things like that? Yeah,
there's a whole scene where they go after the vampire, and there's a whole, where his breath gets rapid, and he's lusting for blood, and they kind of refer to him as an animal, and there's a beautiful woman involved, as there always is. So, and he's a great lord, and I think he has there. If you know that Polidori was a physician, you can kind of see where he can see how it's almost, in some ways, it's almost an allegory for a bit of an addict or something. I think, but I knew the backstory, so I could kind of read into it where maybe the physician was, laying out the everyday vampire in everyone.
Let's these vampires. Of course, there are a lot of people right now who practice this, aren't there?
Yes, there. To my knowledge, there's probably there's probably a vampire in every town, and I don't identify personally as a vampire, but I do have a couple of friends in a closer circle that would identify as a vampire, and I don't want to say what they do in their private life behind closed doors, but they certainly aren't wandering around, trying to bite unsuspecting people's necks. They're very into the vampire culture, the pop culture element of it, the aesthetic kind of glamorous, romantic appeal of it, the way they dress, the kind of music they listen to. It's sort of a stage beyond going goth. You go vampire. And,
well, they even get their teeth changed, don't they?
Oh yeah. No, I know a great guy. His name is Father Sebastian. He has the same publisher that I do. They published Vampire Magic and something called the Sanguinomicon. And he is a fangsmith. That's what he's done with his life. He puts on balls, vampire balls, and he gives tours, and he actually will make you custom fangs. And it's really a whole lifestyle.
It's a cult, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is. I think you could get away with going there if you weren't, really seriously into it. But I think that they have a certain protectiveness to it because there is sort of a magical element and a ritual element where they do certain things to just kind of stay in tune with that vampiric lifestyle. Of course, now, George, I'm sure you've met them. There are other vampires alive today, and they're not the kind of vampires that are very fun.
No.
Those are those people that just drain you.
The psychic vampires. They're out there.
Psychic vampires, and they're out there, yeah.
Some of them don't even know they are that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely sort of it's a victimless crime in some ways, but there's people that will drain you, and you can definitely see how they're vampires. And there's actually another book that I came upon that was called, I think it's called The House of the Vampire, and that was one of the first novels that looked at vampires on the more psychic level. In other words, that they can connect to you and they can drain your energy, and that's what they are taking. They're not actually physically taking your blood; they're taking some other form of your life. All the other vampire novels before that have that element, but they blood is at least the allegory for it. In this one, they actually talk about the psychic energy.
Has Hollywood over-dramatized these vampires, made them look so lovely that everybody wants to be one?
Maybe, but I don't know if that's really a bad thing.
I mean, like the Twilight movies, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, if Dracula were to run into one of the characters from Twilight, he would probably, put a stake through their heart. I don't think that they're quite the same on the same page. But, I mean, I think that, sure, Hollywood glamorizes vampires. I mean, there was a remake of Bram Stoker's Dracula. There was, all the Twilight books.
I like the old classic ones. Nosferatu and things like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Those are classics. You can't replace those.
No, and you could never replace Bela Lugosi. And if you try, you'll just feel bad about it because
right.
there's no replacing. And he had a real.
Of course, Tom Cruise was pretty good, wasn't he, in his vampire movie?
Yeah, that was one of the few roles I really liked him in.
Well, Varla, stay with us. Varla Ventura with us. We're going to come back and talk about werewolves and banshees on Coast to Coast AM. Don't touch your dial. We will be right back. Well, we'll take your phone calls next hour with Varla Ventura as we talk about werewolves, vampires, banshees. More to talk with her about when we come right back. And welcome back to Coast. Varla Ventura with us. We'll take your calls next hour with her. Varla, let's talk a little bit now about those werewolves.
Werewolves.
I like talking about them, like lycanthropy. Some people actually believe they are werewolves.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually a clinical diagnosis called lycanthropy, or I mean, that's how I say it. You can say it however you want. I've only heard it a few times. There is actually a very real disease, and when a person actually believes themselves to have been transformed into a non-human animal, specifically a wolf, they don't necessarily sprout hair and howl at the moon, but they believe that they've been turned into a werewolf, and yet people have been treated for it.
Well, they sure have. They sure have. I mean,
and locked up for it, no doubt.
What happens to them?
It just becomes a delusional state. So I think it's like an OCD or any kind of manic state that you get in. It's actually a chemical imbalance, and it's a disease, and they just become convinced that they have been transformed into this beast, and they usually exhibit, animal-like behavior, growling and kind of cowering in the corners and things like that. Not necessarily going after people, but very attracted to the moon, wanting to just believing that they are a wolf.
Now, how did the talk, the mere mention, the books on werewolves begin?
I mean, I don't know where the original origins came from. I mean, back in like the 1500s and the medieval times, werewolves were lurking out in the woods, but they were a little bit more of a romantic creature, at least in the existing record. They were a little more sort of benevolent, sort of wandering around the woods, more like like you might think of a wolf, dangerous if you were a small creature in its path, maybe a child in a village or something, but for the most part, kind of trapped inside this wolf's body, but a man by day or a woman by day, and usually, a pretty gentle person. So there was that kind of Jekyll and Hyde transformation.
Did people think they were real?
Yes. Actually, what I found completely fascinating is that one of my main source works for the ebook collection that I did, that includes the Natural Causes of Lycanthropy, another book called The Werewolf, and The Werewolf of the North. A lot of my source material came from this man named Sabine Baring-Gould, and he was actually best known for writing the hymnal Onward Christian Soldiers.
You're kidding, but he worked on werewolves?
One of his biggest books that he worked on, and it was this massive book. I mean, we're talking like 850 pages, and it was called Werewolves, and it was the study of werewolves and it was a sort of, there were elements of it that are folklore collections, collecting stories from different people, sort of, like the Grimm brothers did with fairy tales. But there's a lot of sort of psychoanalysis. So here's this man in like the mid-1800s, and he has this very, normal seeming life, but he genuinely believed that werewolves were real. And he definitely believed that the people that told him about the werewolves believed what they saw. So, there's a lot of times in his writing where he's sort of vague about whether or not he really believes the story, but he certainly presents the evidence as a person who's seen too much to not believe. He was like the George Norrie of his time, I guess.
Heaven help us.
Well, onward, Christian soldiers, right? But I thought that was really very interesting, because here you have someone that, from an outside perspective, you would never think that they would believe. And he wasn't going at it because he was, like me, a big supernatural geek that just loves all these kinds of stories of the unusual and the strange and the magical creatures and the ghosts. He was really more of dare I say, he was a more of a normal guy, and he just he dedicated a lot of time to this work. There's Scandinavian werewolves. There's werewolves from around the globe. And in the Natural Causes of Lycanthropy, he has some pretty radical, I would say they're radical ideas about degrees of being a werewolf. And in fact, he even states that we all have within us the capacity to become a beast and become a werewolf. And he cites examples of serial killers. He even gets into kind of some of the stages that women go through in pregnancy, that they might crave certain things, or they have sort of this irrational behavior. And he says that everyone who's ever exhibited irrational behavior has a little bit of a werewolf inside of them.
Where did the full moon thing come from and things like that?
Well, I think the full moon actually, I live in San Francisco, and I'll tell you, on the night of the full moon, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. It's louder. There's more crazy people out. There's just more activity. And I think that we all are kind of, though we might not know it, we all are sort of connected with those moon cycles. I think maybe it was the brightest night. If you were to really go back, it was the brightest night of the month, and perhaps that's when they were seen most often. And you do hear wolves howling at the moon. So I think that transformation. We could get real specific into what it has to do with what people thought about women at the time and their cycles and all that, but I don't think we need to go there.
Not for radio. Nah.
No,
We'll
I think that we want to talk a little bit more about the,
Well, where did the silver bullets come from and things like that?
I think that comes
Was that Hollywood?
You know what? It actually has a lot of root in folklore, and I think it comes from, I think a lot of times actually in some of the old stories I was reading, it's a silver dagger. And a lot of magical work, like in witchcraft and Wicca, a dagger, especially a silver one, has a lot of very specific energy. So I think that people knew if they're dealing with the supernatural, you don't go after a supernatural beast with just an ordinary bullet. You've got to meet them on this other plane. And today, we're pretty far removed from the supernatural, really. We actually think it's confined to movies and books. But there was a time when, we couldn't get cell phone calls and we weren't constantly connected, and people were a bit more in tune with what was kind of going on in the world around them, and maybe as a result more fearful. But you don't go out and meet a supernatural beast in the woods with, a bow and arrow. You've got to meet him with something that's powerful.
And hence the silver bullets.
And hence the silver bullet.
Now, what's a banshee?
Well, a banshee is usually almost always an Irish spirit. There are
an Irish spirit,
an Irish ghost, usually portends death in some way. Often generational, and very often it takes the guise of a beautiful woman or a hag or both, can transform into a hag. Very, very common for them to be women.
After she tricks you.
Very tricky, very beautiful, very enchanting, very mournful cries. A lot of the Irish folk tales tell about banshees being women who died in childbirth, women whose children died young, women who died of some kind of tragedy. And they sort of hang around, and they don't just hang around you. They hang around your whole family, and then the next generation, and the next generation, and the next generation. And they'll show up, and if you see them the next day, maybe they'll show up in the room of a sick child. Someone will see just the foot of something kind of leaving the door when they come back in the room. And they'll think, what was that? Was that a banshee? And the next day, the child dies. It's usually They don't kill anything. They're not really out to cause death, but they do foretell of it, and they are very connected with it.
How did they start? I mean, how did the myth begin?
I don't know if I can say exactly how the myth began. I really think that in Ireland, there's a deep connection to the magical underworld, and I think that if you've ever been in Ireland on a windy night, actually, if you probably have heard banshees howl in your own home. There's a certain thing that you might hear and you think, oh no, that's just the wind. That time when you're kind of scared, but you tell yourself it's the wind. It's actually probably a banshee, and it's probably best not to go and look for it because you really don't want to see one, no matter how beautiful you might think they are. You don't want to see them.
Amazing. So banshees, they just come at any time they want?
Well, usually, if you something usually has to happen in your family history for you to get a banshee. A lot of times, if it's a banshee that was maybe a woman whose child died young, that was a real common way for a family to start getting a banshee. If this woman in the family or close to the family, their child died, and then a child in the family gets sick, the banshee appears. And once one member of the family sees it, it tends to become a generational thing. And in Italy, there's ancestral ghosts that sort of like haunt specific families, not even places, specific families. Scandinavia and Germany, very similar things. They don't call them banshees. Technically, you wouldn't call them banshees, but they have a lot of the same characteristics. Maybe you've heard stories of the Lady in White. And the Lady in White is often referred to as a banshee or what you might call a counterpart to the banshee. And that's, maybe the German version of this mournful woman who keeps appearing every time someone in the family gets sick or is going to die. And, not everyone sees them, but they see them regularly enough that it's part of family history.
Tell me a little bit about this Ouija board experiment and experience you had when you were younger.
Well, okay, my family's probably listening, so they're just going to have to hear the truth.
Spell it out for them.
Well, I was a teenager, and actually, I started using the Ouija board when I was pretty young. My mom brought one home, and my sister and I used to use it pretty frequently, and we did kind of make contact with the spirit of a young girl that lived on our property. And then Ouija board disappeared. Mom said she lost it. I think she just kind of hid it because I think she wasn't expecting us to get the activity that we were getting. And we really were. And it's a strange thing if you've ever done it, that feeling when you're doing it and you're looking at the other person, are you pushing it? Are you pushing it? And something's actually happening. So I had done it a few times, and then when I was pretty young, I would say like under 10. And then when I was a teenager, I got a hold of another one, and I was in a basement of this Victorian house, and I was with a guy, and we started doing the Ouija board, and it really actually scared both of us. There was a lot of stuff happening really fast. A couple times the planchet, which is the thing that
moves
points
around,
to the,
sure.
Yep, that just went flying off the board.
Well, how do you know you didn't let some kind of entity through that's followed you all your life?
You don't, and that's, I think, why my mom hid the board. You don't know that. And if you're not capable of dealing with that, that's when it's trouble. And it's funny that Parker Brothers just cranked these out for anyone to buy for Christmas.
Oh, they love it.
It's like, here you go.
It's still a big seller.
To the next world.
In terms of board games, it's that and Monopoly are doing very well, even in this era of video games.
Yeah. I think, though, that parlor.
They won't comment. We've tried to get them to comment on the Ouija board. They won't. They don't want to make any statements. Yep.
But they still put it out, right?
Oh, yeah, it's still made. Sure.
I think it's one of those things. It does sell because we do have that interest. And I think, that is exactly why I think my mom hid it, because at a certain point she realized that we were actually getting some hits, and we were young, and we didn't really know.
Well, did you think for a moment that your boyfriend was moving it around, moving the planchette, and he was probably thinking you were doing it?
Yep. And there was just a certain point when I think we both took our hands off of it, and it went flying off the board.
That's strange, yeah.
And that was pretty much it. And what were we doing? We were in a basement of a creepy old Victorian anyway, and it was dark, and there was just a candle. I mean, we were looking for it, and we found it, and we both stopped and went upstairs and, drank a lot of wine after that.
Well, you know what? I always thought, how old were you, though?
I think I was 16.
16, drinking wine, Varla?
Yeah, no, I wasn't drinking wine, no.
Okay, good. Your parents are listening again. Your family is. Look, I always thought the planchette might have moved subconsciously by the individual, but I guess not so, huh?
You know what? I had actually had that thought before. Well, one time when I was doing it, I thought, I'm going to think something, and I'm going to see if that happens. And I think it did have a little bit of a subconscious. I mean, I don't think it would just move if you weren't really wanting it to move. At least inside, if you weren't really wanting it to move.
If you consciously wanted it to move, I don't think it would.
If you asked it to move, it wouldn't move. And if you took your hands off it, maybe it's just working on vibrations. But that is exactly why the legend of the werewolf exists, so that 16-year-old girls don't go traipsing about out in the woods.
No, that's not a good idea, especially in this era.
Especially in this era. There are werewolves out there, girls.
Too many wackos out there. So between vampires, the banshees, the werewolves, what entity scares you the most?
The entity that scares me
and don't say most, humans.
Besides humans, the entity that actually scares me the most, between those three, probably banshees.
Really?
Probably because if you see them, I love the idea of them, but if you see them, then you know that someone close to you is going to die, and that is kind of a scary thing.
Yeah.
That thought is scary.
Or it could be you. Who knows, right?
Could be you. Yep. It's a lot of times. But actually something that's a little even scarier to me are the changelings, which are the creatures that get swapped out with regular babies left in the crib. They, the dark fairy creatures come and they swap out your baby for this changeling. And you don't know.
Do they look the same?
Yeah, they look the same, although I think if you really,
you're kidding me now. You're kidding me with this, right?
No, these are as real as banshees. They scare me because there's this idea that, there you are just like at night sleeping in your baby's in your crib, and you've done everything. You've locked all the doors. You've checked them 3, 4, 5 times before you lay down. But then there's this supernatural thing that can come in and prey specifically on your kid. That scares me more than banshees.
Well, it sure does. Okay, Varla, stay with us. We're going to come back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM with you. We will take a final hour of phone calls with you as we talk about vampires, werewolves, banshees, and you name it. Check in with us. Varla Ventura with us, her website. They're all linked up at coasttocoastam.com. She's also on Facebook now, as well as we are. If you want to follow us on Facebook, simply go to our website or Twitter. It's up there in the far right-hand corner. Just click that. Then you can like us and follow us along. And we send you information on our Facebook and Twitter every day, by the way. So stay current with us. Back with your phone calls on Coast to Coast AM. Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit.
All right, and everybody, just for a quick announcement for anybody who might just be passing through, this is not the official Coast to Coast AM station. We are providing these videos for purposes of commentary and education under fair use and the Fair Use Act. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. Mount Shasta. Is it a porthole to a hollow earth? What's going on there? In a moment, Stephen Sindoni joins us. We're going to talk with him about this on Coast to Coast AM. And if you're into the supernatural, you're going to enjoy this hour. Stephen Sindoni grew up on the streets of New York City and was surrounded by people of many backgrounds, ethnicities. This aroused some curiosity about the human condition and a need to understand, hey, what makes people choose the paths that they go down? Such is the case when he came across the legend of J.C. Brown. We'll talk about that, the man who claimed to have discovered a lost city in Shasta Mountain and hidden treasure and remnants of a legendary society. Here's Stephen on Coast to Coast. What an exciting story, Stephen. How are you?
Very good, George. It's been a long time since we've spoken.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be on with you again.
You were with me about 4 years ago, I think.
That is correct. I was with you on April 18, 2008, to be correct.
Well, good to have you back. For a lot of people who are brand new to this show, Stephen, tell us a little bit about the legend of J.C. Brown.
Okay, the legend of J.C. Brown it's a baffling story about a man who shows up in Stockton, California in 1934 at the age of about 67, and he goes into the office of the editor of the Stockton Record newspaper, and he spins a tale about a lost treasure that he said he had found 30 years earlier while employed with the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England, approximately 1903 and 1904. And the editor of the paper gets him in touch with John Root, who becomes the organizer of a group. They also get the curator of a museum, Harry Noyes Pratt, of the Hagen Museum in Stockton. And for 6 weeks, they hold meetings twice a day. And J.C. Brown claims that while prospecting, he had come across an unusual rock basalt formation, and upon his second trip up to the Cascade Mountain Range, he dug it out, and whereupon, after going into this tunnel that he found, 3 miles into it, there was mined ore and gold there that he saw from a prehistoric type of race, and as they went further, 8 miles further into this mine-type shaft, he came across a city, as he called it, where he found skeletons 6.5 to 10 feet tall. He found mummified remains of a king and queen, he believed, from Lemuria, and he found hieroglyphics that showed an ancient culture. And what he wanted was these 80 people that had assembled in 1934 to accompany him up to Mount Shasta at his expense. And what he said, there was 2 caves that he found, other than the one he was talking about, and that in the 2 caves that he would give the collections of what was found there to the 80 people that went up on the expedition, but the other cave where the mummified king and queen remains were, he wanted to keep intact for the museums. So on the morning of May of 1934, when the 80 people were supposed to leave from Stockton, California with J.C. Brown, he mysteriously disappeared.
Oh, really? So you started your own investigation into this. Did you find anything a little different than the myth?
Oh, absolutely, I did. When I first read it, I read it in Emily A. Frank book, Mount Shasta, California's Mystic Mountain. There's only 3 pages in there, but I said I'm going to spend a couple weeks at the New York Public Library at the time, and just to see if I could research this to find out what I could, because I was looking for a screenplay to write. And so I spent a couple of weeks. The first thing I did is I said, well, was there a Lord Cowdray? You know, because in the legend is the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So
right.
As funny as it sounds, I just Googled Lord Cowdray Mining Company. All of a sudden, bullseye, I found out that there was a Lord Cowdray Mining Company.
It pops up, huh?
So it pops up. So I'm looking further. It says, who is this Lord Cowdray? And this was the tough part, because what I found out later, that Lord Cowdray was a name that was given afterwards to Sir Wheatman Pearson, who was knighted in 1916 and was given the title of Viscount Cowdray in England. So I thought, well, let me look at the age of this man. And he was an older man at the time, but in 1934, one of the stumbling blocks I came across was that Lord Cowdray had died, or Sir Weetman Pearson had died in 1927, so he could not be the man who showed up in the Stockton record in 1934. So I reread the legend, and it said the man said he was a lieutenant for many years with the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So I went to a different library in New York, and I was able to find the memoirs of Sir Weetman Pearson, Lord Cowdray. And in the book, there happened to be pictures of 3 other civil engineers. And I'm looking at the other 3. So I said, you know what, let me go back to the library in 34th Street and look through all the border crossings and see if I can match up the other 3 names of the civil engineers with Sir Weetman Pearson or Lord Cowdray coming across either through Mexico, through New York, Canada, or any border crossings coming into the United States, because 80, 90 years ago, our country was pretty much anal retentive with records, like who's coming in the country. Nobody could really sneak in. So there were records at that time. So I said, well, if that be the case, I'm looking for specifics now, 1903, 1904, in that area, as the legend states. And now that I know that Lord Cowdray was really Sir Weetman Pearson, let me look at him and other men who are in this civil engineer's memoir for Sir Weetman Pearson. So I did, and lo and behold, one of the men's name in the photo that I had was John Benjamin Body, of the 3 men that were in there in Sir Weetman Pearson's memoirs. I noticed that John Benjamin Body started making crossings into the United States through Laredo, Texas, as early as 1903. And then I noticed that coming through, he had come in with Lord Cowdray or Sir Weetman Pearson in 1904 with other men that were engineers of the Lord Cowdray Mining Company.
So
upon further inspection, I noticed that there was about 3 or 4 instances where Lord Cowdray, Sir Weetman Pearson himself, came in with J.B. Body, but J.B. Body had come in through Mexico possibly up to 18 times in a 15-year period. But what was interesting, George, was that in the 3rd or the 4th time John Benjamin Body was coming through, on the manifest records, when asked if he had ever been in the United States, he lied and said no.
Wow. Why would he do that?
Well, the reason why I believe he did that, though, is because going up to Mount Shasta and coming back, he had to cross the border. And some of the artifacts that he had gathered underneath the mountain, he had to be very, very careful as to what he took back over the border into Mexico, because he was working for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company in Mexico. And here was a man who was building the Tijuana-Pec Railroad, which connected the Pacific side of Mexico to the Gulf. And what they did was, when the goods from China would come to the United States, they would come through to Mexico, come across on that Tijuana-Pec Railroad, and they beat the United States to the Panama Canal by 12 years. So this was a major deal for the Pearson Company, or the Lord Cowdray Mining Company, because they were closely related or in business with Porfirio Diaz, the president of Mexico.
So he had to hide some of these artifacts, you're basically saying.
Exactly.
All right. Now, this tunnel, this long, long tunnel, did anybody else find it? I mean, have you seen it? Is it out there?
I've seen it. I got photos of it. If you go to my site, stevensindoni.webs.com, I have a picture of the basalt rock formation, and it's on private property, I will tell you that.
Is it as long as everybody thinks?
Well,
Deep?
You have to get through the doors, and once you get through the doors, it is as long as people think, yes.
So it's very possible the things he says that he found, these skeletons and everything else, might be real.
Exactly.
Now, there's got to be something mystical about this.
Yes, there is, and here's the mystical part of it. After I was on your show, I decided to go out to California to actually find these doors that lead into the bowels of Mount Shasta. Upon doing so, someone had sent me an email about a man who was hiking in that area, and him and his daughter was on Thanksgiving of 2008. So I was on your show in April. Excuse me. But in November of 2008, this gentleman, while walking with his daughter, had come across this rock formation, and out of nowhere, a 7-foot man with a white robe appeared and spoke with a British accent and invited them in and told them they had just found the back entrance to Telos.
Which was the back entrance of the front entrance of this tunnel, right?
Yes.
Okay. So way on the other side.
This man and his daughter had the choice of going in or not going in. Well, this tall figure, probably ominous figure, scared the bejesus out of both of them, so they declined.
That's probably smart.
Now, this man, his grandfather, Levi Van Fossen, owned the property by Hedge Creek Falls and Mossbrae Falls about 100 years ago. So this property that this man was walking on was once owned by his relatives. So afterwards, he put this story on the Internet, and I contacted him through someone else because I figured, well, I'm not ready to talk to him directly, but I had my friend contact him by email, and he validated that, yes, this did happen. So I figured I'd wait until I had more information to see. So I had visited the site 2009, 2010 myself, and actually had photos of this basalt rock formation and knew exactly where it was. And I figured out how it was done. And what happened was Lord Caldray and Sir Wheatman Pearson brought with him John Benjamin Body, who was the J.C. Brown of the legend, and other engineers up to the Shasta Springs Resort. And they were there on vacation. And Shasta Springs was where it was an elite resort where you could drink the Shasta water. It was bubbling spring water that they had on the property, which came from the mountain itself. So the lava tubes go from the mountain onto this property. So this was an elite property. They would get off the train in Dunsmuir, take a tram up to the property, and they would spend their vacation there hobnobbing with the rich and famous. These were all very rich, prominent men. So while they were on this property, they came across this unusual basalt rock formation, and being all civil engineers, decided to dig it out. And on consecutive trips, J.B. Body kept coming back and back and back, at the request of his boss, Sir Wheatman Pearson, Lord Caldray, to dig this out for the artifacts. But John Benjamin Body waited until after Sir Wheatman Pearson died.
Okay, hold on for a second, Stephen. We're going to take this quick break. We're going to come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Stephen's website is hooked up at coasttocoastam.com. We'll get into what the heck is going on at Mount Shasta, and we'll take some phone calls. If you live in that area up that way, if you've ever been there, check in with us, or we'll take your questions. We'll be right back. Okay, you Coast Insiders, my colleague John B. Wells, who hosts the Saturday night Coast to Coast AM and then fills in for me, he will be participating in our chat tomorrow for you insiders. Starts at 8 p.m. Pacific time. If you would like to be a Coast Insider, it's very easy to do. You just go to coasttocoastam.com. It's about 15 cents a day now, and just fill out the information and become a Coast Insider or get it as a gift now for the holidays. And we'll be back in a moment with Stephen Sindoni. We'll take your calls and find out what the heck is going on at Mount Shasta when we come right back. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. We'll take your calls in just a second. Stephen Sindoni with us as we talk about Mount Shasta. Stephen, this area, is something going on? Are people disappearing in the hole? What's happening there?
Well, there's a number of things that are happening in Mount Shasta. It depends on who you speak to, who you ask. For example, you've got a lot of UFO phenomena that are happening there around the mountain. You've got stories of beings from inside the mountain inviting people in. You've got a lot of people that are channeling different ascended masters in the area. And then you've got the military presence around the mountain, who has an underground base on the backside of the mountain. So you got quite a bit of things going on around Shasta.
Is it something that could be dangerous for people?
No, because there's two things, George. There's love and there's fear. As long as you got love in your heart, you're not in fear, then nothing can happen to you. It's those who cross that line and are afraid or in doubt, and then the controllers have the ability to make things difficult. For anybody who's a good person, they have nothing to worry about but fear itself. So if you don't have any fear, then you have nothing to worry about. You walk in the light.
Stephen, the people who rejected the invite from the 7-foot robed person, what might have happened? It's always conjecture, but what might have happened?
I spoke to him last night, and he may be one of the people that is going to be in my movie, the documentary movie. So we're trying to work out when we can meet. But he spoke with me in detail last night, about 40 minutes, and he is under the impression that California is Lemurian continent, and it's the eastern portion of Mu. And from my research and what I've learned and what I've seen while I was up there, I tend to agree with him as well as the man of the legend, John Benjamin Body, or J.C. Brown, that this is an important link. This race is an important link for ancient American history.
Had they gone into that tunnel, would they have come out?
I think they would have.
Okay.
Well, John Benjamin Body, or J.C. Brown, went in on my border crossings. He went up to that area about 13 times, and he lived up until 1940. And the only problem he had was he had told the men in Stockton in 1934 that on one of his expeditions up to the Cascade Mountain Range, he was kidnapped and just barely got away with his life. And what I came to learn was he was friends with one of the Harrimans, and the Harrimans are one of the wealthiest,
the political
families
Harrimans
for the last 100 years.
Yeah,
and they did not want the story to get out. So John Benjamin made the mistake of telling the Harrimans, and he put himself in jeopardy as a result of it.
Who kidnapped him, or tried to?
The Pinkertons, I believe.
The security
before
company?
The CIA, there was the Pinkertons, and they were the secret, they were a group of the government that, was sent out to squelch different things, and I believe it was the Pinkertons that scared him off.
The tunnel, is it natural or is it man-made?
The tunnel is a man-made tunnel in the inside. The outside, it's a rock basalt foundation, but the inside of the tunnel has actually been carved out.
Okay, let's go and take some calls. Let's go to Medford, Oregon. Jim, you're with us on Coast to Coast. Hey, Jim.
Yeah, I'm Shasta Indian myself.
Okay.
I belong to the Shasta Nation here. And I've been up on Mount Shasta several times. I just want to say that it's our tradition that we don't go above the snow line on the mountain. It's our creation.
Why not?
Like our Creator created us from up on the mountain and wake us seat.
And what do you think's going on up there, Jim?
It's something that we kind of keep under our hats because it's sacred.
Well, lift up the hat and tell us what's going on. Come on, you called.
Yeah. It's just that, in many cases, we try to keep, people from going into it because it's the creation.
Are you trying to keep them from going into it because it could be dangerous for them or because it's sacred?
It's sacred.
All right.
Jim,
go ahead, Stephen.
I'd like to interject, Jim. Jim, have you ever been at Northgate on the north part of the mountain where the Shasta Indians have their own? They've got their sacred site there on the Northgate side of the mountain, and it's about I'd say 5,000 feet elevation where that is. Have you ever been there?
I've been through there, yes.
Okay, so you're aware of that, okay? Because that's the highest level that I see remnants of your people in Mount Shasta.
As we talk about the hollow earth, is it hollow ground, basically, hollowed ground? Is it spiritual, Stephen?
Yes, it is. Diane Robbins, who is one of the channelers of Adama from Telos. It was a friend of mine when I was up there in 2008 or 9 when I went up to actually look for the mountain. And her and I became friends, and she's got a number of different books about it. But basically, there is a civilization that lives underneath that mountain in a crystalline type of a city that have been giving her information, and other people as well have information about these Telosians. And through the years, there's been stories of them coming into town with gold nuggets to buy things, and then like next thing, and they were wearing like hippie-type garments, and then all of a sudden they mysteriously disappear. But they've been seen throughout the years, so this has been documented evidence of a civilized race on this mountain.
Let's go to Jabari, calling from California, first-time caller. Hello, Jabari.
Hi. It's just an amazing show tonight. Thank you so much. I've been to Mount Shasta. I make pilgrimages there regularly. I was a guy who was raised to only believe what was in the Bible, but I just saw so many things that particular holy book couldn't explain. And George, and I was actually in the jungles of Peru. Even though I lived near Mount Shasta, I was in the jungles of Peru when I found out how holy it was. This French woman I met there said, "You've got to go. You've got to drink the water." And I've been, people see UFOs there. They have angelic contacts. Every dream I have there, every night I'm in the area, is a vision. I tell you, it's just a center of love and synchronicity. And it's not just Mount Shasta, George. It's the neighboring mountains as well.
It's that area. You can feel the energy there, can't you?
Well, speaking of the eclectic things that happen there, Hedge Creek Falls, I'm going to throw that out there. There's a waterfalls there, and people come from India, China, all different Buddhist religions come out there to get married underneath this waterfalls. It's one of the most oldest waterfalls in the world. And next to it, right next to it, to the left of it, I've taken photos of petroglyphs there that show Lemurian carvings there that are hiding in plain sight right there in Hedge Creek Falls. I've also seen UFOs in Mount Shasta hovering over the city. I remember the date was 9909, and a cloud opened up, a lenticular cloud. I saw a fleet of ships that had left the mountain, and they just traveled east, and like they beamed a light down at me and my friend to let us know, I want you to make you aware of us, because I had just left the mountain at about 10 o'clock at night and went down into town, hoping I would see something that night because it was 999, all the numerical significance of it. And then to come down into the city and not to let me down, they actually let me see them later that evening. So, yes, there are things happening there, George. And the reason why I'm going back up there is we're doing a documentary film. I'll be up in Shasta October 6th. I'll be at Berryvale on Mount Shasta Boulevard about 12 noon. Anybody who wants to go on an expedition or be part of our film crew, we need cameramen, grippers, and other people to work on our crew. They can sign retainers with us. We have a deferred payment, but I expect to have this movie made by late November, get it out in Hollywood, because I'm about to reveal some other things that I've learned while I was up there. There are other caves that have gone unexplored. There's a story that was by Nola Van Valer, and she claimed for 10 years that she went up on a certain part of the mountain, which I'm not going to mention where it was, and there were two caves there, but she met Philos the Tibetan and Jesus and other ascended masters on these two caves. And I have the last map of this, where these caves are, and it is my hope that because I've been doing my spiritual work, that when I go up there later this month, that I will be able to meet these individuals, because I am ready for the contact, and I want to share this with the people of the world, because we are a spiritual being living in a material existence, and it is time for people to take off the blinders to realize that all the biblical text that we've been taught is a lie. It's half-truths. It's a lie. I don't care if it's Judaism, Buddhism, if it's Christianity, whatever it is. There are all half-truths, and we're really talking about a 12,000-year timeline, George. And once you get past the 12,000-year timeline, then their whole control theories collapse. and the controllers will not be able to take the paradigm shift because the truth will set us all free, George, and that's what I'm about to do, is set it off and let the truth be known.
Pretty dramatic, Stephen. Pretty dramatic. This woman, is she believable? The one who said she saw these entities?
Yes.
Next up, let's go west of the Rockies. We'll go to Maui in Hawaii. Marty's with us. Hey, Marty, thanks for calling.
Thanks, George. I love your topic tonight. My wife and I, who are still married and living here on Maui now for 30 years, when we went to college, we went up to Humboldt State. We lived right on I bought 5 acres right on a point on the coast where the San Andreas Fault re-enters the land area. It comes in from the ocean. In fact, we lived in Well Gulch, and from the mouth of that gulch, you can see how the thin ridge line was sheared off from the inland portion. It's a perfect match if you just laid it together, how the San Andreas Fault just sheared this massive gorge 2,000 to 3,000 feet deep and 15 miles long. And but we would drive over. To go over to Shasta, we had to go over Paradise Ridge, which is a long ways away. I mean, I don't even know. It's got to be minimum 75 to 80 miles, airline miles, to Mount Shasta, but you could see Mount Shasta from Paradise Ridge right on the coast. And it was so gorgeous. But we would go over there for, like, when we'd have a couple days off from school and drive up as high on the mountain as we could get till we hit snow. It was interesting that your Indian guest said that they wouldn't go past the snow line. Neither did I, and it's a living, breathing mountain. I mean, the thing rumbles. And, Mount Lassen, you can feel the thing and you can hear it. I mean, it's a living entity. And, Mount Lassen, which is adjacent to Mount Shasta, blew up not that long ago. I believe it was in the teens of last century. And the devastation from that eruption is still evident clearly to this day. And I think Mount Shasta, it is not a dormant volcano. It is fully active, and you can feel it just by driving up there.
Yeah, you could probably feel little earthquakes, too, I bet.
Oh, yeah, no, I used to spend, I'd have to leave after a couple nights. It was just a very intense place, and I was at that time away from my Christianity and was very much interested in dabbling in...
Would you ever go back there, Marty?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I have friends that live in McLeod, and I drink. The water I drink, and I swear to my wife, and she's done pulled it on me if I could do a blind taste test. I drink only water from Mount Shasta.
Really? At this still?
Yeah, you can buy it in the stores.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's in bottled water.
And I drink the bottled water from Mount Shasta. I love it, and I can taste the difference in it. And my wife can't believe it, that I can pass a blind taste test on bottled water.
And how do you feel? Does it have any medicinal healing properties?
Well, yeah, I feel that it refreshes me. But any water, when you live on Maui,
yeah,
it's almost 90, and the humidity is almost 90. Water is really refreshing. Yeah. But I love my Shasta water. I drink it, prefer it wherever I get it. I'll go out of my way to get it. But it is a very special place, and it is the most beautiful mountains, and the colors that it displays from a long distance from what I was saying on Paradise Ridge all the way over on the Humboldt coast. You could look over and pick out Mount Shasta, the very summit of it. And the colors at sunset time around it are just gorgeous. I mean, they're as gorgeous as any tropical sunset, which we have here in abundance.
Oh, yeah, it is. We've got some pictures up there at coasttocoastam.com, and it is quite the sight. Still getting a lot of UFO reports out there, Stephen?
I'm getting quite a few from people, and that's why I'm going out there to make that part of my documentary, that aspect of it, because people are seeing them. And I'm about now ready to go public with my stories, what I've seen, and what other people that I know, personal friends of mine, who I can look them in the eyes, and I can read body language. I can tell if someone's snowing me or not. I've been around the mountains there a number of years, and people that claim to channel this one or profess this or that, and I'm a pretty good judge of character. Growing up in the city of New York, where you have a lot of charlatans, it's easy to figure out, fact from fiction. And you can tell who's genuine or not. And the nice thing about this particular trip, I will be going out with certain people, and we will go out and we will research certain things, and we're going to see for ourselves. Vendi Vidi Vici. We came, we saw, and I'm going to conquer. And I need to change the existing paradigm in a New York minute, so to speak, because I don't like what's happening, the suppression of the truth. And I have hundreds of movies that I've put out on many, many, many topics, and I find it appalling, and I find it shameful that people do not want to think. And they're afraid to think of what they might discover. So I'm about to help lower the veil with the help of many others in Shasta.
Sounds like you're going to blow the lid off something, Stephen.
Well, I would like for people to know the truth. I mean, anybody who's followed any religious persuasion, any belief system, belief, is it a lie? Lie? I don't know. We'll find out. I want to be able to pick things apart, dissect it in a way intelligently, and explain it to share with people. It's not how you perceive it. Perception is in the eyes of the spin doctor. Let's get the spin doctor out of it, and let's fully examine every angle of it as you would a magician's trick.
Stephen, do come back safely when you go out there, would you?
I will come back safely. I'll have a number of people with me on previous trips that I've taken, George. I've had people that, let's say, shadows, so to speak. But I encourage the shadows to come out and to go into their heart and realize that I am a man who is going to make things better for humanity. So help me, do not hinder me. And I don't care how much money you're getting paid, if you're not doing an honorable job, maybe you need to go to work for Burger King and learn the phrase, "Would you like fries with that shake, Mr. Sindoni?"
I love it. Stephen, thanks for being on the program again. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM as we talk about 2012 and beyond. Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows. The Coast Insider. Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel and the premiere screening of Beyond Belief with George Norrie. The following episode is brought to you by Gaia and BeyondBelief.com. And welcome back to Beyond Belief. I'm George Norrie with another stunning episode. This episode, we talk with one of the foremost experts in ufology, Richard Dolan. He's an investigator, a historian, and by the way, has his own television program on Gaia called False Flags. Richard, welcome to the program.
Hi, George. I'm very happy to be on here with you.
It's exciting talking to you about all things UFOs because you know your subject matter as well as anybody in the world.
Well, thank you. It's the most fascinating subject that I can imagine, and it has drawn me in now for the last 2+ decades, and it has not relinquished its grip.
That long already?
Yeah, I'm always struck by the great discrepancy. This is how I look at it, between this massive UFO reality, and it's every single day there are sightings around the world, and that doesn't mean that they're all alien craft, of course, but there are interesting sightings around the world. And yet they get really very little public attention and very little official recognition by the United States government and really by most governments. So.
Did we get more coverage back in the 50s than we do today?
It's a good question. I think in a way yes and in a way no. So in the 50s, when this was all very new, back then really newspapers were the main source of information and media. TV was just getting started. There was radio. And so newspapers and radio did report a lot about UFOs and the flying saucers, as they were called back then. Then it kind of went through a low period.
A laughter period.
Yeah, it really did. In the 70s and 80s in particular, I think it was low. And it's picked up. I think it has picked up in the last 10, 15 years. I really credit the web. I think the internet has really done this, and it has forced television networks and major media to get back into this, because what they've discovered is people are interested in this.
You have a passion for this field, Richard. How come?
I think I have a passion for truth. I know it sounds idealistic, but I really think that's what it is. I've always been interested in getting underneath the official truth, the official established verities that I'm supposed to believe. And I've always been of the opinion that there's something behind the scenes. And when I got into the UFO subject years ago, it became clear to me that this was a reality that has been taken seriously by very, very prominent individuals in the national security community, despite the fact that all of the official word is that there's nothing to this. It's all hoaxes, hallucinations, misidentifications. But that's not true. So when I found that there was this great discrepancy, it's the way that I am. I can't let go. And I will continue to try to pry that open to the best of my ability.
Do you think there's going to ever be government disclosure? Because I tell Steve Bassett, no.
You don't think so?
It's not coming that way.
It depends on the day of the week what I might think. So I believe that we're moving towards something. I think our society is changing. It has been changing dramatically over the past number of decades. And that won't stop. You know, we have a much better ability to communicate. We have a much better ability to get information, even illegally at times, out of government through WikiLeaks and things like this. So we're not in a stable world in that sense, and I think anything can happen. I don't believe that there will be a voluntary government disclosure of UFOs unless and until they are pushed to the wall by some extreme event.
Something happens.
A leak, a sighting, something that's not foreseen. Otherwise, no, I'm not seeing it as very likely. The only possibility that I could envision along a voluntary line would be maybe in a couple of decades, if the governments, let's say there's a kind of a confidence that the U.S. government has, or some other government, global government has, that they could release this and then control the spin, control the narrative. Right. If they felt that they could do that, maybe they would. I don't think that anyone's in that position yet, even the U.S. government, which is the master of spin. I don't think that they're in a position to control the narrative completely yet, so I don't think that they're willing to do it.
For a couple decades, you've been pushing and striving to get some answers. But what does Richard Dolan think about this phenomenon?
I think that we are being visited, or whether by visitors or by long-term occupants, whoever they are. I think that there's another intelligence that is behind at least the core element of the UFO phenomenon, and they're not us. They're not our civilization. I don't know if they're from another planet. I don't know if they're from another dimension of reality that we can't quite grasp. They could very well be from another world, but I think that they're not from our civilization, and they've been monitoring us. Beyond that, it's all speculation, George. I mean, do they manipulate us? Do they watch us in a benign way? Or do they think we're their property? These I don't know. What I do believe, though, strongly, is that governments of the world, most predominantly the United States government, but also many other governments, have encounters with these objects. They are important. They are unexplainable in a conventional way, and that there is secrecy relating to this. And as far as I can see, that the policy is to continue with that secrecy as long as possible.
Do you believe that there are secret programs between governments and extraterrestrials?
Again, I don't know, but I think that there are definitely secret government programs that deal with this phenomenon. So I think that there are clandestine programs to study acquired non-human technology, let's call it UFO crash retrievals.
Sure.
I think that those exist. I think that there are programs to study non-human physiology and biology, that is, let's say, alien bodies. I think those do exist. I realize I don't have proof, but I will say that there's actually a surprisingly large body of testimony over the decades that lead to that conclusion, and that's my best bet. So I think that there's clandestine black budget program that's existing to study this. Whether there's collaboration with other intelligences, we have stories, we have rumors, and we don't really have a lot more than that. We have interesting stories.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that sometimes we would do better, honestly, to hold off before jumping into some of these stories that really have there's no way to confirm them in a way or corroborate them, really, other than just what unverified people say. And, my dad, who was a retired New York City cop, really taught me. He said...
he taught you how to investigate.
He said, look, anyone can tell a good story. Anyone can talk. What you've got to do is you have to look for evidence.
What got you into this field?
History. I was working on a PhD many years ago in U.S. Cold War studies. And that's always been my life, is politics, geopolitics, study of intelligence agencies. And back then it was all about 1948, 49, U.S. policy back then, the CIA, the early Cold War, the Russians. And from there I stumbled into the UFO field. I read one of Tim Good's books, Above Top Secret.
Absolutely.
The worldwide UFO cover-up. And that intrigued me enough, and I just became completely sucked right in.
Well, you become one of the top researchers in this field, Richard, in a short time.
I love what I do. Thank you. I try. Look, I don't ever expect that I'll have all the answers. I don't.
To Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Noory. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com.
Thanks for inviting me into your home, long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed rec room with the shag carpeting, the wood paneling, and the tabletop hockey set. Your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Welcome to Coast AM. I'm Richard Serrett, sitting in for George Noory, and tonight this morning, we're coming to you live from Coast's Toronto, Canada affiliate, In-Depth Radio News Talk 1010. Well, someone gave me an early Christmas present a few days ago. The flu. But I have come prepared. I have my wild oregano extract drops, and I have my throat coat medicinal tea, and I have some hot soup, homemade pho, actually, to get me through the next 4 hours. And I have you and your wonderful company. Let's not forget that. I may be feeling a chill, but that's nothing compared to what Brad Olson will be facing very soon. We'll be reaching Brad down in Terra del Fuego at the bottom tip of South America as he awaits passage to Antarctica. Brad is a world traveler, an award-winning author, and no stranger to Coast listeners, and he joins me in the first 2 hours of the program to discuss his adventures in South America, including the mysterious cold plasma building techniques of megalithic Peru and Bolivia, evidence of fugitive Nazis harboring in various South American countries post-World War II, and he'll also discuss the adventure that still lies ahead when, as I say, he'll cross the Drake Passage, about 620 miles, to an area of Antarctica he has dubbed Illuminati Disneyland. And there he hopes to catch a glimpse of a supposed UFO craft 3 miles long under the retreating ice. Also, we'll discuss antediluvian pyramids and architecture now being revealed, suggesting the southern continent could harbor craft that would force disclosure or was once the legendary continent of Atlantis. Now, the final 2 hours, of course, open lines. And here's what you need to do. Get up on the roof. Now be careful. It could be icy up there. Take a flashlight. 3 flashes, and I'll lower the tractor beam and bring you on board the mother ship. You climb into the co-pilot seat and help steer this vessel clear until morning. And if that all sounds a little complicated, perhaps a little treacherous, well, you can also use the telephone, if you must. Brad Olson's excellent and bizarre, most bizarre adventure is next. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come warm yourself by the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. I'm Richard Serrett, sitting in for George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Why don't you stay a while? Brad Olson is a world traveler and author of 9 books, including 2 in his esoteric series, Modern Esoteric and Future Esoteric. An award-winning author, book publisher, and event producer, his keynote presentations and interviews have enlightened audiences at Contact in the Desert, Awareness Life Expo, the 5D events, and dozens of radio programs, including Coast to Coast, and television shows, including Ancient Aliens, America Unearthed, Beyond Belief, and Mysteries of the Outdoors. The Chicago native's esoteric writing continues to reach a wide audience while he continues breaking ground in alternative journalism, public speaking, illustration, and photography. Brad Olson, welcome back to Coast AM. How are you?
Hey, Richard, I'm doing great. Nice to hear your voice and talk with you again.
Likewise. Now, where are you actually in Terra del Fuego, or are you en route to Terra del Fuego?
I am en route. Right now, I'm in San Carlos de Bariloche.
Oh.
Lake region of Patagonia. So I'm only about 10 hours away. But it's so beautiful here. I feel like I'm in the Bavarian highlands. In fact, there is quite a bit of Bavarian architecture around here, very Germanic influence in this area. And I got to tell you, I've been to the area of Birch's Garden where Hitler had his eagle's nest. And I'm telling you, this is like a dead ringer here. They got the Kling Sea in Bavaria, and here we have the Lago Noel Huapi, which is this beautiful glacier-carved lake with white-cap mountains all around. Quite spectacular scenery here in Carlos de Bariloche.
Yes, that is supposedly where Hitler and perhaps Eva Braun lived out their natural lives after escaping the Führer bunker in Berlin. At least that's the theory. Now, the Inalco estate outside the town center, is that where they actually supposedly hid out?
That's right. And just yesterday when we were pulling up to town, we went and investigated around Bahia, Montana. Bahia is bay in Spanish, Montana, kind of like the state. And that is where the mansion called the Residencia Inalco is located, although that is very much on a private estate. You couldn't get near it. It was rumored to once have had it was right on the lake with cows from Switzerland to create the scene of a Bavarian alpine home, and had a seaplane out on the lake for quick escape. And apparently it's up for sale. Had been 2 years ago. Not sure if it is sold yet, but a couple days before that, I was up in the Cordoba Sierras, and we went to the Eden Hotel, another place with Adolf Hitler sightings post-World War II, and that was owned by a couple that was very much sympathetic to the Third Reich and had traveled to Germany, Mr. and Mrs. Eichhorn, and they, too, had a lot of money donated to the party. In fact, they even specifically donated to the propaganda wing for the Third Reich, which really struck Adolf Hitler as something quite endearing to his heart to have them act in such a manner. And sure enough, so I took a tour of the Eden Hotel. It no longer has guests, and the guide could speak fairly good English, so I could ask him some questions. He showed me the presidential suite where supposedly Eva Braun and Adolf Hitler stayed. I said, well, do you really think he was here? And he says, oh, yes, I think he was. And he survived the war and spent out his elder years in South America and quite possibly died in Paraguay, another country that had fascist dictators and were somewhat sympathetic to the Third Reich's cause, but by that time it had evolved into the Fourth Reich. And this also ties into Antarctica and the new Schwabenland, which we'll get to later.
Yes, we will. Just staying with Argentina and the Nazi hideout there, I believe Joseph Mengele was also rumored to have been there. Did you find any evidence for that?
He was here. He was more of a boys from Brazil, and also Martin Bormann was also popping up all over Argentina and South America into the 1950s. He was the deputy Führer at the end of World War II. He was always by Hitler's side. He was always taking notes. He was the money man, Richard, and this is actually a bigger part of the picture than probably any other escaped Nazis, because he would have had control of all the loot that was pilfered out of Europe. And in the waning years of the war, they were ordered to get it out of there. From mid-1944 on, the rules of the Reich changed. All of a sudden, you couldn't take anything out. But then, all of a sudden, that loosened up. And there are still tons of gold, priceless artifacts, and quite a bit of resources that were never accounted for at the end of World War II. And I would say that Martin Bormann had a big hand in that. We also came down through Bolivia, and there was a sawmill in a small town in Bolivia where Klaus Barbie was said to have lived out his natural life. So quite a few escaped Nazis in this area, and that's part of my presentation, The Mysteries of South America, which I'll be giving at 3 conferences next year when I get back, along with the Anomalies of Antarctica. I'll be at the 5D event in Las Vegas, April 19, 2021, at Beyond the Matrix in Sedona, Arizona, March 19th and 20th, and Contact in the Desert, which is in the setup piece, May 31st through June 3rd. And there I will have a much more detailed presentation with videos and photos from my trip and all this information that we're presenting here on Coast to Coast tonight, and then some.
You mentioned some of the Nazi war plunder. I mean, there was so much gold, so many priceless, masterpieces and so forth. How much of that do you believe was brought to, I guess it was Mar del Plata, in the closing months of the war, aboard those 2, I think there were 2 German U-boats that appeared at that Argentine naval base. How much plunder was on there? I mean, how much could they have fit on just 2 U-boats?
Well, it didn't necessarily have to come with the Führer convoy. It could have come in other units. It could have even gone down to Antarctica, because they were working on the secret space program after the war there. And when we get to the Antarctica part, we talk about New Schwabenland and Operation High Jump. They must have had incredible amounts of resources to engage with the Allies and to continue their operations in the Base 211 or New Berlin Base in New Schwabenland. So could have been that some of the loot went down there, maybe some of the priceless artifacts, such as the Spear of Destiny, which was very prized artifact. One of the first things Hitler did when he annexed Austria was go to the museum and acquire the Spear of Destiny, which is supposed to be the spear that stabbed Jesus Christ on the cross. And they felt that if you had these artifacts, none could resist thee. And as the beginning of World War II started out, it appeared that this German army was invincible. And they were very much into the occult, Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Hitler himself, believing that if they acquired these artifacts, and just like in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Nazis were very much into archaeological expeditions from all the way out to Tibet, to Egypt, like portrayed in the movie, to the Languedoc region, digging around for the Ark of the Covenant at various locations in southern France. So they were very active trying to get these artifacts because they believed so strongly that they would help them in the war effort, knowing that their numbers were inferior to, say, Russia and the Allies. They felt that if they had special abilities, well-trained army, or some of these artifacts like the Spear of Destiny, that they would win against such overwhelming odds. But, of course, history tells us otherwise.
Well, the spear it's a fascinating artifact. I believe, according to legend, you're right, whoever possessed it could not be vanquished. And I think Constantine possessed the Spear of Destiny, Charlemagne, Napoleon, perhaps. I'm not 100% sure about Napoleon, but I believe that Charlemagne rode into battle with the Spear of Destiny, and he had quite a record.
That's right. And Charlemagne was the First Reich. Second Reich coming in the 1800s with von Bismarck and some of the other notables of an expanded Germany. And then, of course, Adolf Hitler thought that the Third Reich was going to be the 1,000-year Reich. And maybe if we include what has happened with the Fourth Reich, which leads up to this modern day, maybe that prophecy is still coming true.
Staying with South America before we jump over the Drake Passage here, I want to talk about the what you found in Peru and Bolivia. Were you up to Sacsayhuaman, I believe, where these giant stone walls, which are just, well, explain what they are. It's a remarkable. Some of these stones weigh something like 200 tons, and the way they were placed without mortar and fit together so perfectly, you can't even slide a sheet of paper between them.
Yeah, one of the most fascinating sites I've ever been to, and I've now been around the world to 6 continents, going on 7 when I get to Antarctica. I have to say that the Sacred Valley and around Cusco, where Sacsayhuaman is located just 3 kilometers above the city, is the densest concentration of megaliths in the world. And Sacsayhuaman, there are just these concentric walls, like terraces, that zigzag in and out, and the lowest level, which is on a flat plain, and it's everything to do with the Incans, or what we propose were built by pre-Incan civilization. Because oftentimes, Richard, you'll find inferior brickwork above the megalithic, even cyclopean architecture. And as you mentioned, with such precise fitting that you can't even put a credit card in between them. And we're talking about 20-ton, 30-ton, 70-ton blocks at Oye Tambo, which is another very fascinating site. I had the great opportunity of being one of the guest speakers with the Resonance Science Foundation, and Brian Forster was along for the journey, and Nassim Haramein was leading the trip with his delegates of 150 people. And we went around to a different sacred place every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 within a day. And this group was just amazing. Such wonderful, enlightened people to travel along with and have an opportunity to engage with Brian Forster and Nassim Haramein as we went to these sites. And it wasn't just Sacsayhuaman above Cusco. In the town of Cusco, many megalithic avenues as well as buildings built upon them. And outside of Cusco, up in the hills, there was this site called Moray, which are these concentric circles, and it's perfect acoustics when you get in there. And we had the great opportunity of doing meditation and oming in there. And I'll tell you that the sounds from oming just really resonated. I like the fact that their name is the Resonance Science Foundation, because I think they knew what they were doing when we got into Moray and did that meditation together. It was really fascinating.
When it comes to these, when it comes to these interlocking stones at Sacsayhuaman, I mean, there are a number of theories as to how they may have constructed this, and one is something called stone softening. That they found some mysterious liquid they derived from a plant, and they could soften the stones. Another is they used large sun mirrors, heat generated from large sun mirrors. But you're talking about something called cold plasma technique. What does that mean?
That's right. So in the case of these massive stones, I should preface it first by saying from Cusco to Chinchero to Oye Tambo, all across the sites here, none of them will you find any chisel marks. It's just as if they were fitted so perfectly that they do marshmallow out. What I mean by that is, while the joining blocks are straight as an arrow, but oftentimes with many angles, there's the famous block of 12 angles in Cusco. Those joints are so well fitted, and they think it was done that way rather than just straight square or rectangular blocks for earthquake purposes, because they have survived many, many earthquakes, being as old as they are. But the marshmallow techniques, and that's almost like if you had a wet stone, let's say wet clay, and the way it dried, the gravity would take it down. The marshmallow effect leaves little knobs always at the bottom, and the bulge more towards the bottom than anywhere else. So Brian Forster, Nassim Haramein, and others were saying that the technique was done using a form of cold plasma. Now, what that is a technology that is unknown to us, which is a way that the block had been perhaps made into more of a fluid form while it was being transported, then put in place with those straight, perfect precision lines. And then
Brad, I'll tell you what, I got to jump in here. Pardon the interruption. We'll take a time out, come back and pick up on that point. Cold plasma technique in the construction of these stone walls. Here's Ike and Tina taking us into the break with Sugar on Coast to Coast AM. Great to be with you on a Friday night into Saturday morning, sitting in for George Noory, coming to you live from Coast's Toronto, Canada affiliate, In-Depth Radio News Talk 1010. Hey, get on up to the coasttocoastam.com website. Our webmaster tonight, Greg Bishop, has posted some tantalizing tidbits, some great stories, including some great images in the carousel provided by our guest tonight, Brad Olson. There's a terrific map of the Antarctic from the National Geographic magazine from around 1987, I think. And you might want to check out that while you're listening to our conversation, and it will help you visualize what we're talking about. And then there's this photograph. It's kind of pixelated, kind of grainy, but looks all the world like some kind of large metallic disc protruding from the ice. We'll get to discussing the Antarctic with Brad Olson momentarily. World traveler, best-selling author Brad Olson is with us. Brad, when you get down to Tierra del Fuego, first of all, are you going to be on the Chilean side or the Argentinian side of that island?
Well, there's both sides that we intend to go to. Traveling with my fiancée, Emily Infinity, and we will go to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city you can drive to in the world. And that's where all the ships leave from, not only the cruise ships, but also expedition ships. However, they also fly, and that, by the way, is on the Argentina side. But on the Chilean side is the Tierra del Fuego and the airport that goes down there. So we might check that out as well, because we need to get on an expedition to make it to the Palmer base, which is the forward. Then you would go to a forward base to go see some of the anomalies that I call the Illuminati Disneyland.
Right. And how difficult is it to get passage, either by air or by sea?
Well, it's quite easy to just pay for passage, but then you're just doing the tourist route. You're just going to see penguins and icebergs. But we want to go on an expedition, and if we were to fly, then I would have to go to the Chilean side, which is just on the Straits of Magellan to Punta Arenas, and that's the airport that goes down there. And they do have regular flights, but it's usually just touch and go. I had a friend who went down there on one of the flights. You just go to a Russian base. They'll let you stay one night overnight, but then it's pretty much back on the plane and leaving. So again, you may not get past the penguins to see some of these anomalous features, which I'm going to talk about later when we get to the America.
And do you need a visa to visit Antarctica?
Not that I've heard of, and not that I know of. Antarctica is not anyone's country; it's everyone's country. That is, there are no national borders, so therefore there wouldn't be any visa requirements, or I don't even think we'd need a passport, although we bring it, of course, for identification purposes. But it's this autonomous continent that is not owned by anyone, but there are several dozen countries that have bases down there. And we're trying to go to the Palmer base, where we would be able to take an expedition out to the Palmer Peninsula, where I've identified something very strange at the Union Glacier, which are some of the images that I sent you. It's when there was a big data dump, remember, from Fitbit and Strava, which I use when I do my bike rides or work out. It's connected to GPS. And these two companies had a big data dump, and all the GPS information of people who was traveling to Antarctica was shown. And several of these locations, they're just doing big circles around something, or geometric walkways, either an underground base. This one on the Union Glacier, which you can see on Google Earth, has an airstrip right there. Everybody's taking a snowmobile from the airstrip, going to this location, and doing like this oblong, rectangular walk around something. It's either a base or perhaps one of these giant discs. And there are supposed to be 3 massive discs one of which I think is in the Union Glacier, 3 miles long. And the ice is now melting in Antarctica at a rapid clip. Bernie Sanders himself just tweeted recently that the Antarctic ice is melting 3 times faster than it did just 10 years ago. Now, if that's a result of global warming or the fact that there are more volcanoes in Antarctica than any other continent of the world. A lot of people don't know this. It is the world's largest active volcano system in the world with 91 active volcanoes. Some of those are below the ice, so perhaps it's the volcanoes that are melting the ice at a fast clip. But something is happening down there, and there's a lot of weird and strange anomalies, which we'll talk about, that really boggle the mind, as well as a lot of elites that are going down there as well to check something out. Maybe they're going to this Union Glacier. There's another part of the Fitbit data dump. There was another location near the Ross Ice Shelf that also showed a whole bunch of people going to this one spot and making the same trip, because you can see overlapping data of the people traveling down there. Quite fascinating.
You mentioned some dignitaries and so forth that have traveled down to this location. I believe former Secretary of State John Kerry. It is rumored that former President Barack Obama, I believe the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, all went there. What would the head of the Russian Orthodox Church be doing in the Antarctic?
Yeah, he's the Russian Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill III. Well, he says, and they all have a cover story, that he went down there to bless an Orthodox chapel. Same with actor Tom Hanks, who converted to Orthodoxy, went to go see this tiny little chapel. Then you have Buzz Aldrin, who went down there and tweeted. It was up for a short while, and people did capture the screen capture, quote, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself." And this is supposedly after he saw the pyramids that are there in the Shackleton Range, another great anomaly that's created quite a bit of buzz. These 3 pyramids, Richard, are almost the same dimension as the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, which would say that there are now pyramids on every single continent of the world. But the list of dignitaries and elite and who I would call Illuminati, you mentioned John Kerry. Yeah, he's a climate champion, going down there to see the effects of climate change. Happened to be there right on Election Day when Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. Now, we all know his cover story. Sounds a little suspicious, but maybe he was down there to talk to this Fourth Reich. Maybe he was going to New Schwabenland, to the base there. You mentioned putting up the National Geographic map. I'll tell you something really interesting. When I bought this map, and you can purchase them, and I got mine in leather, and I marked it up with all the locations that I knew of, Richard, my jaw dropped when I saw that it was from 1987. That's the year before the Berlin Wall dropped.
Yes.
And even on the Nat Geo map, it's called New Schwabenland. And there are West German bases that have been in existence since the time of the Third Reich, which went down there in the 1930s to claim this area, also called New Queen Maud Land, this big hump right below South Africa, another country that had fascist ties. And that is the jumping point to go to New Schwabenland from South Africa.
Right. I mean, the Germans were real pioneers in exploring the Antarctic. I think they began like the late 19th century. Even by hot air balloon, they were traveling down to the Antarctic. I think, isn't there an area known as Kaiser Wilhelm Land as well?
There is. This is that one too. Yeah, they are very much into claiming their chunk of Antarctica. In fact, when they went down there in the 1930s in a ship called New Schwabenland, that's where they picked up the name. they flew over and dropped little swastikas all over the region as if that were enough to make a claim. Now, I charted out on my map. People, visitors want to take a look at my handwritten notes. Anytime I could definitively find through GPS or from other resources exactly where things were, such as Point 211 or Base 211, New Berlin Base, I marked it on the map. Another really interesting feature in the New Schwabenland area, not too far away from the New Berlin Base, which, by the way, they could access under the ice with the U-boat. And Michael Sala, a colleague of mine, had recently released image of leaked documents showing the U-boat passage under the ice to get to the New Berlin Base. But the Schumacher Ponds are geothermal active ponds. And I just read the book Dark Star by Henry Stevens before I came out of this, and he was accounting when the German soldiers down there, they were planting their own food. It's the one region of Antarctica free of the ice, and with the warmer soil from the Schumacher Ponds, they could grow their own food down there.
That's amazing. I wasn't aware of that.
The geothermal could also, the geothermal could also create heat, creating these domes underneath the ice, and as well as an energy source. So the Germans picked the best spot, I'd have to say, to set up their bases pre-World War II, and then now post-World War II, West Germany maintained those bases, and they're called Neumayer Base, which is on the coast, and then another one inland called Konin. And another thing that made my jaw drop when I was doing this research, I found the coordinates to some of these anomalous sites, and I'm looking for UFO craft, and this one GPS coordinate went right to where the Konin base was, and there appears to be another craft under the ice in New Schwabenland.
This one craft that you mentioned is something like on the order of 3 miles in length that is
right
now being revealed due to the retreating ice. Is this not can we not see this from Google Earth?
Well, no, you can't. In fact, we've caught Google Earth on many occasions whitewashing out some of these anomalous features, because you can use the time machine and go back with Google Earth and see what was going on there in 2016, for example, with this Konin base, and you can see this anomalous craft that's coming through the ice. Fast forward to 2018, and there's just a couple little humps on the ice that don't really look too anomalous. So either the snow is covering this stuff over, or in the case of these data dumps with Strava and Fitbit, it just looks totally whited out, like it's the side of a glacier. You can't make any connection as to what the people were doing there. But these GPS coordinates and where these people are tracing their steps, that doesn't lie. That was a data dump a little less than a year ago, and would show some of these elites going to these locations. Most notably, most recently, when Trump got elected, was Newt Gingrich, who's a big supporter of Donald Trump, and his wife, Calista Gingrich, who is now the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. So talk about some Illuminati tie-ins.
Interesting.
People heading down there. It really is interesting.
I mean, in your wildest dreams, do you expect to get close to this thing? Would they allow that?
Well, in my wildest dreams, yeah, I do dream about going down there. I was working with Emery Smith, who has some knowledge of it and actually knew the general at the Palmer base. So if I could possibly talk to him, get to Palmer, there is the possibility of getting on an expedition out to some of these forward bases where the Illuminati Disneyland features are, most notably on the Palmer Peninsula, the Union Glacier, where one of these Strava data dump showed many people doing this oblong rectangular walk around there. And he said Emery Smith was originally going to go on this trip with me. We even put up a GoFundMe site, but he's now taken over the Cosmic Disclosure show on Gaia, so he's got his hands full back in Colorado. But he told me that the forward base goes to one of the crafts, and they call it the door. And the door would be, if you're allowed to go, if you even get to the craft, into one of these mother ships. And that, I think, is the big prize of the Illuminati people going down there, is to be able to get access into one of these mothership crafts. That has got to be one of the highlights of anybody's travel career, to be able to do something like that. So I'm still holding out hope. We don't have the budget to do our own expedition. Maybe we can double up. Maybe we can get to Palmer, talk to the general, and try to get on. But I would say the odds are that I'm not going to get past the Penguins, who hold up the iron wall of Antarctica, Richard. You got to get past the Penguins.
That's it. Yes, they're on sentry duty. What do you make of, I guess, that's it. I think it was, nearly 2 years ago, and Corey Good said that he was taken to Antarctica to witness this excavation of these ruins from some ancient, it was a flash-frozen civilization that was buried under something like 2 miles of ice. And the discovery of the ruins apparently dates back to the first Nazi German expedition in 1939. What do you make of those claims?
Yeah, I've met Corey Good several times at Contacting the Desert, including the first time I met him 3 years ago. First time we were both speakers there. And Linda Moulton Howe was interviewing him off the record, and he gave a very compelling, very believable account of his time in the secret space program, but also what he witnessed down in Antarctica. And he has said that he's been to the archaeological site where they're actually digging below the ice, about a mile into the ice, and finding antediluvian architecture. That is, once again, megalithic architecture that is a mile under the ice. Not only that, but they're pulling out Ice Age animals, such as woolly mammoths, giant sloths, that could only have lived before the ice was there. Not only that, but giants of another race that are human-like, but not Homo sapien human, that are 10 and 12 feet tall.
With
Adamite.
Right, with elongated skulls.
With elongated skulls and wearing clothes very reminiscent of the pharaohs of Egypt, which is another very interesting tie-in. When I heard him say that, I was quite shocked to hear that. But they've also done illustrations based on what Corey told him, showing the excavation sites, showing these massive block buildings, kind of like the Osirion in Egypt, with just cyclopean architecture below the ice. This is a suggestion that Antarctica could be Atlantis.
Fascinating. All right, you hold on, and we'll come back after the top of the hour. We'll open up the phone lines at the bottom of the next hour. More of my conversation with Brad Olson as we discuss the mysteries of Antarctica. Here are the Proclaimers, and I'm on my way, taking us into the break on Coast to Coast AM.
Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.
All right, folks. 4 in, 4 out, 4 up, 4 down. We was kicking that booty tonight. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is that part of Saturday where we make the transfer. as we make the transfer over to Vaughn's. For those of you that can follow, Sick Pat Radio will be kicking off here shortly. And for those of you that can't go, I'm really sorry about that, and I hope they fix it soon. And we'll see the rest of you guys on Tuesday. All right. Good night.